But from there, the concerns of the power users diverged sharply from the rest of the discipline. For a majority of the respondents, the greatest impediment to adopting new technologies was simply the amount of time it takes to learn new programs or how to use new tools. In comparison, only a quarter of the power users noted similar concerns. There were sharper differences on two other points. Over a third of the respondents said they waited until they could clearly see the value of a new technology to their research. But where about half of the passive users and avoiders cited this, barely a quarter of the active users indicated that this was a concern, and just 3% of the power users. Likewise, the annoying problem of rapid obsolescence of new technologies was cited by just 8% of the power users, but was a concern to almost a quarter of the other respondents. A different concern appeared when history faculty are asked why they might feel reluctant to publish their scholarship online. The primary concern, cited by almost 80% of those who decided not to publish digitally after considering it, was the perception that it lacks scholarly recognition and prestige of print publication. And a quarter of them also expressed doubts about whether it would improve the resulting scholarship. In comparison, historians who were positively considering online publication were less concerned about scholarly prestige and more concerned about some of the practical problems of finding a publisher and the need for technical support. An issue I tried to raise at a similar presentation I made at the Association of University Presses back in August. Despite the concerns about scholarly recognition in the academic reward system, there was little difference between tenured and tenure-track faculty when I broke them down that way on these same questions. Among historians on the tenure track, over half of the faculty members pre- and post-tenure said they had considered publishing their scholarship online, and the only substantive difference was that tenured faculty were slightly more likely to have actually published some of their scholarship online, which would track with the fact that they were more likely to have actually published something at that point in their career. Many of the same concerns appeared when we asked why faculty might be reluctant to adopt new technologies into the history classroom. And as you can see, the problem of time to learn new technologies once again looms large as the greatest impediment to adopting new tools and software. This was selected by well over half of the respondents of every type except the power users. And this time, the lack of various forms of institutional support was indicated by a third of the respondents. That includes a lack of proper facilities and lack of support staff at either the institution as a whole or the history department in particular. And once again, the problem of quick obsolescence of technologies was also cited as a significant problem by basically 1 in 5 of the respondents. One of the most interesting results in the survey, from my perspective, was how agitated the respondents were about the problems involved with teaching-related technology specifically. The survey offered an open field for respondents to provide other reasons for taking a slow or cautious approach in the adoption of new technologies for both research and teaching, and they were offered separately. And to my surprise, twice as many respondents expanded on their concerns about teaching tools and software. These are discussed, I won't go into them in detail here because they're discussed in much greater detail in an article that I've just published in the December issue of Perspectives. So I won't go back over them except to emphasize that there seemed to be much greater ambivalence about the use of media for history teaching than for history research. Those of us who want to push the discipline forward, I think, more quickly, need to develop a more granular understanding of the different appeals and impediments of these technologies for members of the discipline. As my late friend and mentor, Roy Rosenzweig, once observed, scholars should avoid unreflective boosterism or instinctive Luddism. I hope the results of this survey will help set aside some of the simplistic stereotypes about the conservatism of the discipline that I often read on blogs and Twitter. And the results of the survey, while the results of the survey also suggest the considerable complexity in the patterns of technology used in the discipline. Enthusiasm about certain types of technology, for instance, do not necessarily translate into enthusiasm for other types of technology. And a willingness to adopt some or all of these technologies can often be paired with a sense of caution about the challenges and potential costs involved. Those of us trying to push the discipline forward, therefore, have a responsibility to recognize both the progress that has been made and our obligation to help clear away the remaining roadblocks. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Will Thomas, and I'm the first commenter. So I'd like to just take a moment to thank both of the presenters for a rich presentation of faculty attitudes and of a picture of our colleagues in libraries and in history departments. I want to make just a couple general comments and raise some questions for our panelists. I think first that we can all see that scholarship is fundamentally and rapidly changing. Google Books alone constitutes a major innovation in the discovery of new data, new information, links to the past and in the past. And our practices are changing in the ways that Roger described, but in other ways as well. Particularly, I think, around the issue of, and Rob touched on this briefly, research, what I would call research speed of production. And here Google Books is an important example. Just an example from my own research. I was recently working on a little-known, but nonetheless important for me, Supreme Court case called Catherine Brown versus the Washington and Alexandria Railroad. And so this is a case about segregation in Washington, D.C. And I'm sure you've all had this experience, increasingly so in the last several years. But I started poking around on Google Books to search about this case. And all of a sudden, I could find the lawyers' names. I could quickly discover all sorts of information from obscure county and local historical society publications held in the various libraries that were participating in the Google Books project. This was a sequence of research activity that would have been utterly impossible just a few years before. This sort of immediate and detailed access to information, I think, is unprecedented, and it's changing scholarly practice. The same is true for Ancestry.com. It's a genealogical site. A lot of libraries don't subscribe to it, but many scholars, I do, subscribe to it to do individual research. But searching across, I mean, think about searching across all individual census records for the entire United States from 1790 to 1930. I could find the jurors in this case, the lawyers, where they lived, in city directories, their occupations, their family relationships. This work took all of about an hour, you know. And this was something that would have been very difficult to do just 5 or 10 years ago. But both of these ventures, Google and Ancestry, have significant problems in metadata and encoding and scanning quality and search interfaces. But taken as they are now, along with some of the large data aggregation projects that libraries are leading and what digital libraries are leading, they've led, I think, to a revolution in how we do scholarship, what our scholarly activity is. And so I think in thinking about what's next, coming in here today, I was trying to think about how are our publications and our publication models changing with our practices. If our practices are changing so rapidly as researchers and scholars, what's happening in the field in terms of our publications? And here I think both Rob and Roger point to some issues that we need to tackle. One is that there is a gap. We're using digital sources. When I say we, historians are using digital sources and citing them as if we saw them in print microfilm. I mean, that's happening. Certainly there are citation rules that are developing for online material, but often that is blurred, and we're not sure what the conventions are for everything or how to express the research process we've undertaken in this digital world in our bibliography. This is an important challenge that we've got to come to terms with. Tony Grafton is leading the AHA conference next year toward a set of digital history project and archive sessions, kind of like TED. He's hoping we will have a kind of enthusiastic and interesting and appealing and fast-paced set of examples to look at, and I'm very excited about that. But if scholars produce a work in digital form, I think we've seen some issues just brought up around this. If you produce a work in digital form, can it be placed in a journal? This is a critical question. Our journals look very much like they did 50 years ago. A few have begun reviewing websites, but often these have been public history websites or public history oriented rather than scholar research oriented digital projects. And there are probably 1 or 2 journals online journals out in the field that are fully online, that publish only in digital form and only what we would call born digital scholarship. But they're very few. Now, at the University of Nebraska, we've been trying to do something about this to help journal editors move into digital scholarship with an NEH Digital Humanities grant for what we're calling Sustaining Digital History. Trying to work directly with journal editors, Rob Schneider of the AHR, for example, to help think through how we might peer review digital work, how we might recognize the valuable scholarly products that our faculty are creating. And we saw that diversity of scholarly work across a range of different kinds of technologies. And so all of this scholarship is being produced right now. The question is, how can we fold it in to the professional validation, which, as Roger suggested in his presentation, is so very critical for historians. That's what they value the most, is that, circulation among peers and recognition in the discipline that the journals provide. So I think we have some work to do there. There's no question that a whole range of social and cultural barriers confront scholars who consider digital scholarship, and Rob alluded very helpfully to these. Our department colleagues may not know much about digital technologies, practices, methods, online publication, and promotion and tenure committees. I think that's a very crucial area here, and outside reviewers and administrations need to be able to understand this form of scholarship. I think, having said that, and Rob concluded with some of the issues and barriers facing faculty, I do want to say that, from my standpoint, historians are increasingly interested in producing at least some of their work in digital format. In my department at the University of Nebraska, for example, we hired one faculty member who was directly hired in the field of digital history. But over the last several years, 9 tenure-line faculty members out of a department of 25 have started new digital research projects. I see this as a really encouraging sign. Some of them might be classified as Rob's power users, but more often I would classify them in your terms as active users. But they're moving into developing their scholarly research in this in digital form. I also see encouraging new scholars in history at conferences in digital humanities, taking up digital work. These are Rob's power users, Joe Gouldy, now on fellowship at the University of Chicago, Gene Bauer at the University of Virginia, and at Nebraska, Leslie Working and Jason Hepler, for example. Hepler is writing a blog series ebook called The Rubyist Historian, in essentially explaining his own journey into programming in Ruby language and developing his historical monograph around it. I think finally, one of the most important things for history is that the digital movement in the discipline has been largely, up to this point, and I hope it continues to be, has been largely inclusive and eclectic. And I think that's a legacy of Roy Rosenzweig, a remarkable vision that he had for letting many flowers bloom in the discipline and allowing us to experiment in many ways with our scholarship and our research and in presenting it. In other words, we've not tried at these conferences to say who is and who is not a digital historian. And I think that's an important legacy of Roy's that I hope we will try to continue as we grow and develop power users and active users and others.